Hello, so today we are going to talk about emotional intelligence, part one. So let me just bring in my slides here. So emotional intelligence, part one. These are the five domains of emotional intelligence: emotional self-awareness, emotional self-regulation, emotional self-motivation, empathy, and managing relationships. I want to give you just a quick thumbnail sketch of each of those five domains. Emotional self-awareness is knowing what you are feeling, using that information to help you make effective decisions. Emotional self-regulation is the ability to manage your emotional state and control your interpretation of external events. I just saw a video on YouTube, and it was a person who he was sitting in the airport, and they announced over the loudspeaker that the plane would be delayed by 2 hours. This guy completely freaked out and just went bonkers and completely did not know how to manage his emotions or his emotional state. It's not time to really, there's no time to view the video, but it was a perfect example of somebody who did not have emotional self-regulation. Emotional self-motivation is the ability to work through resistance, things that prevent you from going forward. So it enables you to act and to persist in the face of a challenge. Empathy, you've probably heard a lot about the ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes and understand what they might be feeling and experiencing. Managing relationships, the ability to cooperate, appreciate differences, and create outcomes that are acceptable to everyone. And as Daniel Goleman said, he's the author of Emotional Intelligence, his book that is about 25 years old now. We are being judged by a new yardstick, not just how smart we are or by our training or expertise, but also how well we handle ourselves and each other. So emotional intelligence is about understanding yourself and other people. So is ADR. It's really a study in yourself and other people. So a friend of mine told me that she once had a supervisor with very high emotional intelligence. And I asked her, what does that look like? Can you just list how that person behaved? And this is what she said. She was on our side. We knew that she was on our side. She trusted us and gave us responsibility. She did not micromanage. She let us have input and actually listened to what we had to say. She was fair and even-handed about things. And I thought that her description of her supervisor was a brilliant definition of a highly emotionally intelligent supervisor. So people with high emotional intelligence, they remain calm under pressure, they resolve conflict effectively, they lead by example, they exhibit empathy toward their coworkers. Cicero, right, more than 2,000 years ago said, people decide far more problems by hate or love or lust or rage or sorrow or joy or hope or fear or illusion or some other inward emotion than by reality or authority or any legal standard or judicial precedent or statute. And I think there's so much wisdom in that comment. We say that we're a country controlled by the rule of law. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I think it's more like people behave how they want to behave, and then we might constrain them through the law or penalize them through the rule of law. But I think that Cicero understood that most people make decisions and are motivated, and their behaviors are expressed because of these emotions, and emotions are huge in driving our behaviors. And the more we can understand them in ourselves and in other people and control them and regulate them in ourselves, the better we will be at influence and persuasion and leadership and everything that we have to do to engage in alternative dispute resolution. So emotional intelligence in everyday life, a perfect example, it comes up throughout your day. And if you start to watch for situations where emotional intelligence has to be exhibited, you can find many, many examples throughout the day. For example, in an airplane, the airplane comes almost to a stop, approaches the gate, but it's not quite to a stop. There's inevitably one or two passengers who will start standing up, and you can have emotionally unintelligent flight attendant who gets on the speaker on the intercom and starts screaming something about the FAA regulations, mandate that you sit down immediately. That's the emotionally unintelligent way to handle the situation. The very emotionally intelligent flight attendant will simply get on the intercom and say, "You're standing." Everybody will laugh and the passengers will immediately sit down. But it was handling the same exact situation in a way that very quickly got rid of the problem, did not make anybody feel bad, used a little bit of humor, but that is the emotionally intelligent approach. People who have struggled oftentimes have especially high abilities in the area of emotional intelligence. And why might that be the case? The biographers of President Franklin D. Roosevelt said that in his early adult years, he lived a life of privilege to the point where he was arrogant and condescending. At age 39, many of you know that he was stricken with polio. By most accounts, he transformed himself over the next 7 years of struggle into a leader of empathy, patience, and keen self-awareness. And this is exactly what people with high emotional intelligence exhibit. This is a picture of FDR aboard the USS Indianapolis in 1933. He felt that his disability was a stigma that was to not be shown to the public. That's how those issues were handled back then. The FDR Memorial was built in 1995, but of course has a statue of him in his wheelchair. If you want to see a very interesting debate about these kinds of issues, Google the debate in 1995 on whether the statue should be of him in his wheelchair or not. It's quite interesting what people will say in that debate. I'm very glad in the end that the statue is of him in his wheelchair. This is from author Doris Kearns, who wrote the book No Ordinary Time. Once the diagnosis of polio was made, the battle was joined. For years, FDR fought to walk on his own power, practicing for hours at a time, drenched with sweat, as he tried unsuccessfully to move one leg in front of the other. After what his wife Eleanor called his trial by fire, FDR seemed less arrogant, less smug, less superficial, more focused. He returned from his ordeal with greater powers of concentration, greater self-knowledge. The man emerged completely warm-hearted, with new humility of spirit and a firmer understanding of profound philosophical concepts. This trial by fire obviously turned FDR into a person with very, very high emotional intelligence, very high empathy for other people. He was 39 years old when the polio struck. What if trauma takes place in childhood? There's a recent study actually reported that adults who experienced a traumatic event in childhood have elevated empathy levels compared to other adults. Childhood trauma increases a person's ability to take the perspective of another and to understand their mental and emotional states, and this impact is long-standing. These are the capabilities that one needs to be able to have to be not only a good leader, but to be influential and persuasive in the context of alternative dispute resolution. That ability to take the perspective of the other party, to understand them, to understand their mental and their emotional states. That ability can make you excellent at mediation and negotiation and arbitration and all of those skills that you need for influence and persuasion in the context of ADR. So these are my 7 rules leading to higher emotional intelligence. We just discussed the first one, which is that your personal struggles can lead to higher EQ. Now into rule number 2. Rule 2 is in persuading others. Give them what they need to persuade themselves. And in this context, the words that you choose matter very much. Framing, how you frame the issues or the problems, can play a very large role. So persuasion and resistance, right? Do I persuade you? I don't think that I persuade you. I argue that only you persuade yourself, right? You move yourself from point A to point B in any sort of a persuasion situation. The trick, I think, is to create the space for that movement, to get people to lower their defenses long enough so that they will actually listen to what you're saying, consider it, and eventually conclude that they will go along with it. In this idea, people are constantly raising their defenses. They can tell that you're trying to persuade them, so they want to put up defenses so that they can prevent themselves from being persuaded. If you can just keep the conversation moving along long enough so that they will actually lower their defenses and really consider what you're saying, only then will there be the opportunity for them to possibly persuade themselves to believe that what you're offering is good for them and they should go along with it? Frank Luntz is somebody who has thought about words. He's actually a political pollster. He wrote the book Words That Work. And in one of his books, he talked specifically in a political context about how certain words turn people off, certain ideas. So drilling for oil, he said, in a political context, many people react negatively to politicians who want to drill for oil. So he said, don't call it that, call it energy exploration. People tend to not oppose energy exploration, even though they oppose drilling for oil. He said that gambling can turn some people off. People associate the word gambling with very negative things, whereas if you call it gaming, they don't. And in fact, there was a huge campaign. I used to live in Las Vegas. There was a huge campaign to switch the term from gambling to gaming. If you go to Las Vegas, you'll hear all about gaming. You'll very rarely hear about the term gambling if you were in a casino. The word torture, Frank Luntz tells us, is very negative to a lot of people. But if you say enhanced interrogation, people will say, well, it's okay to interrogate, so sure, enhanced interrogation is all right. I don't necessarily agree with everything that Frank Luntz says in his book. I think in a certain way, some of the ideas and concepts that he talks about verge on manipulation, but I do think that he certainly has a point. Research on cooperation, this is the idea of how you frame things. There was researchers named a board game in one of their experiments, 2 different names. So they had one group play the game in one room and they called the game the Wall Street game. They had a group in the next room playing the exact same game, but they named it something else. They called it the community game. Well, as you can imagine, the people in the Wall Street game were 3 times more likely to be aggressive. Why? Because the game was framed in the context of Wall Street, which everybody knows is a rough and tumble place, so they were much more aggressive. The people in the community game were not. Quite interesting, just how the game is framed. Issues can be reframed, right? Some people will accuse a politician of flip-flopping on the issue. Another politician, or that politician who's accused of that, will say, I'm not flip-flopping, I'm simply evolving, right? My views are evolving. So even small things like that, the word choice, how you frame it, these things make a huge difference. There's an old story about a priest who asked a bishop, is it okay for me to smoke while I pray? And the bishop says, of course not, you can't smoke while you pray. So another priest walks up to the bishop and says, is it okay if I pray while I smoke? The bishop says, sure, it's okay if you pray while you smoke. So it's quite interesting, right? The whole idea of framing is how you approach it. What angle do you take? How do you present it? The word choice. All of these things matter a great deal. And as these 2 small stories illustrate, 2 small examples illustrate, it matters a great deal how something is framed in the word choice. My rule 3 is let the other party talk first, and let them talk for as long as they want, right? Their first offer essentially is stated by when they start talking, their solution to the problem, what they think is fair. All of this might surprise you, right? It might be better than what they present is an idea that might be better than anything you've thought of. Their idea might be better for you than the idea that you were thinking about proposing to them. So I would suggest let them talk first, let them talk as long as they want. They're giving out information. That's the lifeblood of any negotiation or mediation or arbitration. Let them give you as much information as possible before you start talking. I want to have a brief exercise here. I want you to write down 3 words that immediately come to your mind when you look at the following photograph. Again, 3 words that come to mind immediately when you look at the following photograph. You can stop the videotape if you need time. I'm just going to move on here. If you need time, please stop the videotape and come up with 3 words that come to mind. So I'm going to show another photograph. I want you again to write down the 3 first words that come to your mind. Even if you have to pause the videotape, please do that. Then here's the next picture. Write the 3 words that first come to your mind. So there's the photograph. So look for a moment at the 3 words that you've written for the first photograph and the 3 words that you have written for the second photograph. Are the words fundamentally different in what they convey? Because here's the interesting thing. These are the same people in both photographs. They are astronauts from NASA's Mercury 7 mission in the early 1960s. They were training in the desert. You will see, here's the photograph side by side. There's our famous Senator John Glenn, the third from the left in each of the photographs. The other people are a little bit more mixed up in their positions, but all of these are the same people, and you probably wrote very different words based on these two photographs. So the last point I want to make in this video is please be very careful about making assumptions and jumping to conclusions. Very careful about making assumptions and jumping to conclusions. So we'll stop there for now. I'll look forward to speaking with you again very soon. Thanks very much.